Do worms and insects really live inside Spawn? Can they actually restore his body? What happens to his skin in the 1997 film? What important details of his transformation should we pay attention to? What are the radical differences in how his armor functions in the comic and in the film adaptation? And why does the comic show that he still has human internal organs? The answers to these and other fascinating questions about Spawn are in this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support the video with your activity. It means a lot to me. Born of darkness, Hellspawn is isolated, confused, and tormented. He finds no peace in his own thoughts. They are distorted, mixed, absurd. Fragments of memories from a past life that seem to have turned against him. Do they even belong to him anymore? But whatever Simmons has now become, one thing is certain: he's one of those who dwell in the night. Yes, my friends, I've already made a video about Spawn on this channel once, but this time I decided to gather for you much more fascinating information and details about Simmons' new form. Because this dark hero, rarely mentioned these days, even with the rumored upcoming reboot, definitely deserves it. We'll analyze the classic comic book line, the 1997 film starring Michael J. White, and the cult animated series that was released around the same time. So first, let's recall in general terms who the Spawns, or as they are also called, Hellspawns, actually are. Hellspawns are not a single individual, but an entire class of beings. For us, Simmons is simply the most famous among them. They are human souls who ended up in hell and were transformed into demonic soldiers infused with necroplasm, hellish energy. That's the same green energy we often see inside Spawn whenever he is wounded. Hellspawns are created by a demon named Malebolgia. They make up his elite officer corps, destined to lead Hell's army in the coming war against the forces of heaven. By the way, heaven in Spawn's universe isn't the traditional biblical heaven, at least not anymore. In its war against demons, heaven uses almost the same methods and tactics as hell itself. Both the comic and the animated series emphasize that the line between light and darkness is long since blurred. Good and evil aren't heaven and hell. They are choices each person must make for themselves. Hellspawn receives a new body, once again made of necroplasm, which is a copy of his former human form, and that body retains all the injuries that Spawn suffered before death. Malebolgia has a very specific, practical reason for this, something we'll come back to in a minute.
Wow, your face is weird. Cool.
Hellspawn also receives a living symbiotic suit, likewise composed of necroplasm, along with a limited amount of magical power. After recruitment, Malebolgia sends Spawn back to the world of the living for a time, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is so the Hellspawn can practice using his magical powers and adapt to a symbiotic costume. The second is far more important. Malebolgia cannot force any soul to join Hell's army. The soul must make that choice on its own. At first, Malebolgia offers the candidate a deal, something that makes him or her willing to acknowledge Malebolgia as their master. But that's not enough. During their time back on Earth, the soul must ultimately give itself over to darkness. To ensure this, Malebolgia uses his servants, such as the Clown, also known as the Violator. His task is to incite the Hellspawn to violence and destruction. Hell's methods are subtle. For example, early comic issues showed us, through the story of a medieval Hellspawn, how a soul's corruption might occur on Earth. That Spawn still had a sense of honor. The Violator deliberately kidnapped his beloved. The Spawn managed to rescue her, but when she saw his mutilated body, she saw a monster. She never wanted to see him again. And that pushed his soul entirely into darkness. This is why it benefits Malebolgia to leave all the pre-death mutilations in a new Hellspawn's body. It isolates him, makes him unwanted and unloved. Moreover, the Hellspawn's body gradually decays over time, making him even more repulsive to others. This was stated directly in the source material and confirmed by Spawn's creator, Todd McFarlane. In Simmons' case, Malebolgia even waited 5 years after his death before sending him back to Earth. In that time, his beloved Wanda had married his best friend, Terry. Malebolgia understood perfectly that this would push Hell further into rage and hatred. Of course, candidates for the position of Hellspawn are chosen carefully. A complete sadist, even though such cases have existed, is not ideal. A Hellspawn is meant to become an officer in Hell's army, which means he must have known discipline, control, and obedience in life. Soldiers like Simmons are perfect examples. Hell was betrayed by his colleagues and burned alive. Both both the comic and animated series delve deeper into his past, showing that even he was capable of terrible deeds if orders demanded it. He betrayed his former comrades and sacrificed lives for the interests of his superiors. Only after death, returning to Earth as Spawn, did he begin to realize that he had already been a monster in life. He started to understand how much pain he had caused others. That's why Malebolgia had chosen him long ago.
You are a borderline psychopath. Perfect for government service.
However, when it comes to recruited souls, there are some intriguing exceptions. For example, the so-called Mandarin Spawn. In life, he was known as Chang Lei. He lived in medieval China and was born with a large number of genetic anomalies. People considered him a monster, called him the son of a demon, and claimed that he could not feel pain, supposedly. At one point, as part of a tribute, he was handed over to the estate of a local governor. The following year of his life became a true nightmare. The locals amused themselves by subjecting him to all kinds of sadistic tortures, curious to see how much he could endure. And at the moment when his death was near, a mysterious figure appeared before him, a messenger of hell, who offered him a deal to become a spawn in exchange for the chance to take revenge on all those who had tormented him. It seems Chang Lei accepted the terms of the deal without much moral hesitation, but that is an entirely different story. For now, let's take a closer look at Spawn's demonic anatomy, or demonic biology if you prefer. As we mentioned earlier, Spawn's new recreated body, as well as his suit, are entirely composed of necroplasm. Necroplasm is a green demonic substance, the very energy of hell itself. In the lore, it's described as a living plasma infused with the souls of martyrs and demons, possessing both physical and metaphysical properties. Essentially, it's hell's equivalent of matter and spirit concentrated into a semi-liquid mass. Its primary source lies in the energy reservoirs of hell's lower circles, where the souls of sinners are fused together into a massive necro pool. Necroplasm is the main source of a Hellspawn's magic. It fuels all of his abilities: regeneration, teleportation, the creation of various weapons, body morphing, shape-shifting, and even manipulation of reality itself. In short, nearly everything the Spawn's mind and concentration are capable of. But its supply is strictly limited. Every Hellspawn receives a specific amount of necroplasm upon creation, and as it's used, he literally burns away his own life. In both the animation and the comic, this was shown through a visible energy counter. When the necroplasm supply runs out, the body disintegrates and the soul returns to hell.
If you won't lead my army, then you must die.
The comic also clarified that to officially join Hell's army, a Hellspawn must die once more. That is, to completely exhaust his necroplasmic reserve. If, after returning to Hell, the Hellspawn still refuses the deal, his soul is also recycled. The necroplasm supply is limited because Malebolgia, or another ruler of Hell, grants only as much as is necessary to complete the mission on Earth and no more. This serves as a form of control, ensuring that the Hellspawn doesn't become fully independent or turn into a threat to Hell itself. We'll talk about the Hellspawn suit in more detail later, but for now, it's important to know that the suit's power is sustained by necroplasm drawn directly from the host's body. So we've already established that Spawn's body is made of necroplasm, and that raises an interesting question: does Spawn even need necroplasmic equivalents of human organs? In the film and animated series, we never see anything resembling internal organs. However, the comic has shown multiple times that there are organs inside Spawn's body. We've seen his brain, his heart, and even his ribcage. One of the earliest known scenes in the comic shows the Violator tearing out his heart. Al then uses magic to restore it, placing it back in his chest. Later, the Violator severs his arm, and once again we see inner details: muscles, bones. So does this mean that Spawn's anatomy is human-like? In truth, no. Even if we do see organs inside Spawn, that doesn't mean they serve any biological function. They are not anatomy, they are a memory of it. His necroplasmic body doesn't need a heart, lungs, or stomach, but Al Simmons' psyche demands the illusion of them. Deep within his consciousness lies the idea of what a living body should be, and necroplasm, being responsive to his thoughts, literally materializes his memory of human anatomy. It's essentially a psychological defense mechanism. The comic continues to show that Spawn doesn't need organs in the biological sense. There are metaphorical moments involving his brain and heart, but they remain symbolic rather than functional. His body is a compressed mass of necroplasm, not a collection of human internal organs. If you've read the comic or watched the animated series, you might have noticed that in different scenes, Spawn's face, mangled by burns and decay, can look different. In some moments he has a nose, in others it's gone. Sometimes he has soft tissue around his teeth, sometimes he doesn't. In some scenes, patches of skin remain, in others they've completely rotted away. To some extent, these variations are artistic choices made during production, but there are hints that Spawn's appearance changes depending on his emotional state. The necroplasm manifests his emotions physically. And yes, his powers allow him to take on his former unscarred appearance, though he doesn't always have the skill to maintain it, or even the appearance of other people. However, doing so consumes his precious energy reserves. It's too costly.
You're dead. Dead.
In every adaptation, Spawn raids an armory to supply himself with firearms. In the movie, he does this simply because he decides to rely on his old combat skills that never failed him. In the comic and animation, he does it because he knows he must conserve his precious green energy. And though Spawn's necroplasmic body isn't bound by human anatomy, it's still vulnerable. After brutal battles with street gangs, cyborgs, and monsters, he often has to spend his power restoring his body and armor. Yet at times, to save energy, he refrains from doing so. For example, for about 30 issues of the comic, he walked around with a shoelace tied across his face to hold together a massive wound. This is probably the most iconic injury in all of Spawn's comics. Eventually, this shoelace is removed by his old friend, Terry. Observant fans note that it took around 10 more issues for the wound to fully heal. Interestingly, it's not entirely clear how Spawn got this injury in the first place. One theory says it came from Batman's Batarang during their crossover. Yes, that's illustrated in the comic, but rumor has it that Todd McFarlane later declared it non-canon. Allegedly, the wound came from a gunfight in the story arc featuring Harry Houdini. Still, I personally find the Batarang version more compelling. In one of the story arcs focusing on Al's suit, which we'll explore in more detail later, we are shown that he didn't rush to heal the massive wound on his chest for a long time. This once again reinforces the idea that Spawn's demonic anatomy isn't tied to human anatomy. However, there may be some debatable exceptions. From canon, we know that Hellspawn suits are hellish parasites that permanently bond with their host's central nervous system. As neuroparasites, they also feed on remnants of spinal fluid and neurochemical substances. This means that after Al Simmons' transformation into a Hellspawn, his nervous system may have been partially reconstructed. I'd suggest that at the level of fluids and microstructures, some remnants of human neurochemistry might still persist. It's possible that traces of real biochemical processes of a living human remain within the necroplasm. In my view, this is the most plausible theory. And here we arrive at one of the most crucial details of all Hellspawns, their symbiotic suits. There are major differences between how the suit functions in the movie adaptation and in the original source. Let's first turn to the classic comic series.
You must visualize your objective. The armor does the rest.
Al Simmons' suit has a name, K7 Letha, or Letha of the 7th House of K. The suit is feminine in nature, created in Hell and granted to Al Simmons when he became a Hellspawn. Letha belongs to a special dynasty of neuroparasites. She's considered an elite suit. Canon emphasizes that she evolves faster and more powerfully than most other Hellspawn suits, becoming stronger and more dangerous with every metamorphosis. In other words, Letha is a high-ranking demonic entity permanently linked to Al Simmons' nervous system, constantly evolving alongside and within him. Letha senses the signals, emotions, and images that arise in Spawn's consciousness and transforms them into magic, spikes, chains, teleportation, weaponry, reality manipulation, and more. Essentially, she is the conduit through which Spawn's thoughts and will become reality. But Letha also feeds on him. She drains necroplasm from his body, as well as traces of spinal fluid and chemical compounds to sustain herself. She lives off Spawn, turning his emotions, pain and anger into magic. The stronger his emotions, the more powerful and aggressive the suit becomes. That's their true symbiosis. The man provides the energy and the demon gives it form. The miniseries Spawn Blood Feud focuses on the relationship between Al and his suit. In the comic, we see Letha back in Hell, hunting alongside her sisters as they soar over nests made of skulls bound together by slime. At one point, Al tries to rid himself of the suit. He's tormented by strange visions and bouts of unconsciousness. He also suspects, mistakenly as it's later revealed, that the suit haunts people while he's unconscious, feeding on their blood. He barely manages to remove it and throws it into the sea. Without the suit, Al is weak, just as Letha is weak without him. They both suffer, and they suffer for each other. Even now, their connection remains. He can hear her pain. Letha tells Al that they are bound forever, and there's no way back. And Al realizes that Letha is the only being in the entire universe that truly needs him. Only she will value him. In this miniseries, Al has an interesting encounter with a Violator in a sewer tunnel. Afterward, Al notes that sometimes the Violator can actually behave somewhat rationally, which surprises him. In this scene, the Violator shares a few curious details about Al's suit. Al had likely been losing consciousness because Letha is going through her fertility cycle. Secondly, Letha doesn't feed on blood. The suits of her kind feed on souls, in addition to consuming necroplasm. That means she's capable of independently converting souls into necroplasm. And when it comes to feeding, there's another fascinating detail.
What if I sided with Clown?
I'd have killed you.
Spawn sometimes uses a very specific method of restoration, especially when he's been seriously wounded. We don't know for sure whether this process nourishes the suit itself or Spawn's necroplasmic body, but logically it's more likely the latter. In one of the comic's key storylines, Spawn is crucified and decapitated in the Dead Zone. The Dead Zone is an area where the powers of Hellspawns and others are completely nullified. Spawn is essentially dead, but detectives Sam and Twitch recover his remains and bring them back to the alley. There, his necroplasm begins to act like a predatory organism. It pulls in nearby life: worms, insects, rats. These creatures become raw material. They are absorbed and transformed into fresh, hellish matter, recycled into new necroplasm from which Spawn's body rebuilds itself. This happens because worms, rats, and certain insects are scavengers, creatures that feed on decay. In Spawn's world, they are considered beings of darkness, natural carriers of the energy of rot. That's why necroplasm can draw them in and process them into new power. They already carry within them a fragment of the same darkness from which it was created. By consuming such creatures, necroplasm is merely reclaiming what always belonged to it. It's a kind of hellish ecology within the Spawn universe. That's also why in both the comic and the animated series, we see that worms and insects literally live inside Spawn's necroplasmic body. For them, it's not a foreign environment, but a natural one. Necroplasm, saturated with the energy of death, is for them a native habitat, warm, nourishing, and safe. Now let's talk about the key differences in how Spawn's suit works in the 1997 film adaptation. Here, Spawn and his suit aren't two separate beings that form an efficient symbiosis. Instead, the suit feels like an extension of Spawn himself. In this version, the armor's name, derived from the word leather, is more fitting than ever because the armor literally is Simmons' skin. When Simmons first descends into Hell, you can notice that his charred flesh doesn't quite look like normal burnt skin. The scars on his face mirror the same patterns later seen on Spawn's mask. In these scenes, the filmmakers seem to suggest that the armor is already developing within Simmons' being even before it's infused with necroplasm, something visible through the swollen black veins pulsing under his skin. Later, Simmons tells the clown that his skin feels like it's tearing apart from pain, and in the scene of Spawn's first transformation, the clown tells a group of Satanists that they too could acquire such an advanced epidermis, yes, that exact word, at the cost of their souls.
I'll come back when your armor hardens. Don't play with it, you'll go blind.
When the symbiotic armor finally covers his body completely, we can still see certain areas that remain bare human flesh. This is visible on his arms, legs, and torso. It's because his armor hasn't yet matured or fully solidified. Again, the clown himself points this out in one of his lines. At the beginning of the film, we see the ranks of Hell's army before Simmons' arrival. And there we see multiple copies of Michael J. White. Yes, this was obviously done for budgetary reasons, but that's not what matters. The important important thing is that in this adaptation, every soldier in Hell's army has burnt flesh, all of them. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is not the same as in the original source. Here, the burnt flesh seems to be a technical requirement for obtaining such a symbiotic suit, so to speak. Malebolgia's plan was to expand his army through biological weapons developed by his puppets on Earth. This would guarantee him millions of new souls. We know that this weapon was designed to affect the victim's skin, and we even know its name, Heat 16. All of this implies that these millions of souls would also arrive in Hell with their skin horribly burnt, as if it were the necessary condition for the functioning of the symbiotic armor. But one way or another, Spawn's story isn't the story of a dark warrior. It's a story about the fact that Hell is not a place, it's a state of the soul. Hopefully today you've learned a bit more about Spawn. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support it with your activity. It really means a lot to me. See you next time.